this energy is trying to get to know itself, to see what it's capable of. It's capable of anything, but I guess perhaps to see what it's capable of in the human form. And in the book, he also talks about natural growth versus working on growth, or something along those lines, which is what I mean by the original trajectory. We can't help but grow, but when we're working on growing, we're actually contorting and distorting the natural growth process. And on page 147, he says, what would happen if you decided not to treat yourself as a thing to be improved, and instead open to the possibility that it's your nature to continue learning, growing, and evolving? And I feel that's true. We're born as learning and growing creatures. I wonder about the nature of a mirage, and how as we drive closer to the mirage, the water disappears. And I'm just wondering to myself if so-called psychosis or even map consciousness is like a mirage in a way, and it's almost like a mirage of death. It feels like one's going to die. Yet, as the process goes on, one gets closer, it doesn't happen. Like, death doesn't happen. So in that way, the fear and the terror is sort of a mirage. I'm wondering if that's like a mirage in consciousness. I'm wondering if I could possibly have that context arise when something that tries to take over consciousness as terrifying might come into consciousness. I like what he says on page 162. He talks about traditional approaches to coaching and training, blah blah, are application-based learning, teaching techniques, skills, methods, and then encouraging people to apply them. While these approaches can be useful for routine mechanical processes, their effectiveness drops off sharply for complex cognitive and creative skill sets. Why? Because successful application depends on clarity and the quality it brings. And he talks about implication-based learning, focusing on the foundational principles that drive high performance. There is no separate implementation step. As individuals see the implications of these foundational principles, implementation is automatic. Insightful understanding of the principles behind clarity literally removes contaminated thinking and allows you to see more clearly. I think that's what I'm doing myself a bit, is this implication-based learning. I see the implications of things and what's implicit, and I'm always learning that way versus learning skills, techniques, methods from somebody else to superimpose in my consciousness to then act as a compass by which to act. Whereas if I'm always learning, the learning itself is the acting. Even just learning right now by extrapolation, by talking to myself, I see the implications, but then I also see the implications of this process of me talking to myself on a whole. And I was even thinking about how before, when I've been in so-called psychosis, I've told a friend to videotape me because I feel like it'll sort of collapse the wave function into existence. Like, that happened for real. It wasn't my imagination, and in a way I felt like that would make it so it doesn't need to be repeated, because I processed that it happened and here's the proof. In the same way, I feel like me doing this self-dialogue is like that process, but in reverse. Like, why not record all the healthy context that I'm wanting to unfold. Because in the video of psychosis, I was unfolding the context of I'm a homeless person, and this is the pain that homeless people feel, and it's excruciating, and I'm freezing cold, and I'm stuck here and I can't even move. I've gotten to the point where my reality tunnel has so collapsed that I can't even move. And this is sort of the opposite of that. And two, by having all these self-dialogues of me supposedly well, it's showing myself my wellness, as opposed to talking about it in terms of problems. And again, it goes with that quote by that philosopher, I'm not talking about this process I've experienced as a problem. I'm talking about it as a mystery. And mysteries don't need solutions. They just are to be explored and wondered about. And maybe part of what consciousness is trying to show in map consciousness is the nature of thought. Because most of the time I'm pretty clear, but when psychosis comes in, there's thoughts and there's lots of scary perceptions, and they're all just thought, and they don't really have anything to do with the present moment. And then I'm lost in a world of terror because of those thoughts. Well, that's what's subtly happening to everybody all the time, just in regular ego consciousness with one's thoughts. And that's why, especially recently, I've seen any thought, if one does enter my consciousness, as something not to associate with, because if one thought leads to another and another and another, then it can turn into something scary. So I see even a single thought as something like a snake to be jumped away from. If I have an insight or something new, that's fine. But an old memory, nothing, I don't want anything to do with it. So I observe it, and then it just goes away instead of identifying with it, in which point it can start to associate with other thoughts. So it seems like the nature of thought is mapping our world and creating the world that we experience. But map consciousness scrambles all of that process, and then we're in a world of something completely different, beyond experience, just immersed in it and with it and part of it. And so map consciousness tries to remap us by scrambling those thoughts that are actually this big ego structure that is moving us about in our habitual form. But when that's scrambled, we're all over the place and creating new maps of ourselves, even in our neurophysiology, because we're acting different, we're gesturing different, we're speaking to more people than we normally would. That's actually a clue for embodied mania, is talk to more people, talk to more strangers. There's something powerful about strangers, and it could be that there's a moment with strangers when the me becomes a we, even if it's a smile. So all this self-dialogue is understanding the nature of thought and understanding the nature of consciousness through the process of so-called psychosis, which is just the universe. The universe is way more powerful than our little ego structure directing our life. We're lucky that the universe has a mechanism where it allows us to operate that way, and that would be the whole supposed free will principle. And he talked about how the caterpillar has imaginal cells, which is part of what helps to inform the metamorphosis process. Well, our original mind, our original trajectory is sort of like our imaginal cell that helps to inform our transformation. And he brought up a good point somewhere in the book, that when we have clarity and peace of mind, it's not personal. and the personal is the ego. And so how can we have clarity and peace of mind when that is talking on? So it would be about making life not personal. Life is life. We don't necessarily have to make the events and experiences about us. We aren't the true subject. And we're subject to the laws of the universe, not the laws of the ego. And I thought of a word, not just building community, but building calm immunity, meaning a community of immunity through the context to which it understands to be how the universe works. And the universe works through us. So how do we work for the universe and for each other? Because we're each a universe and the universe. They use the term lived experience for mental health. I would say I have lived experience of trance consciousness, of map consciousness, of dancing with the universe, as the universe, by the universe. I've lived experience of magic. And through the process of map consciousness, one becomes more raw. The nervous system is no longer painted over with the words of explanation of the ego. Things can't be explained away or abstracted away from. And so one is more sensitive, so one has to be acting and moving more in alignment with the laws of the collective human nervous system. And then medications come in and dull out that sensitivity. That sensitivity is designed so that we actually can start to create that which is life-affirming and moving away from those elements that our nervous system would naturally retract from. And then comes the term, this is against my neurology, this is against my nervous system. And so I do like the concept of neurotribe. I also thought of that society is a mental health challenge, is mentally challenging. If it was designed in alignment with the laws of being human, we wouldn't need to think so much about it. So we don't actually have to think about how to chew our food because it's just so much a part of us. All these other things that are actually against how we're designed, we have to think about. And I feel like reality could be designed in a way that was more intuitive, that wouldn't require so much thinking in order to navigate. And it could be also that we think we have to think in order to navigate when we really don't. So it's the thinking that is the problem. And if we weren't thinking and we were sensitive, we would be sensitive to all these things that thinking makes us insensitive to. And that's why we think to remain insensitive, because we don't actually want to see what's happening. We don't want to see what we're collectively creating, that we're part of. We've created a reality that ensures we grow up psychologically torturing ourselves with our own voice. It's a clever trick. I read a blurb about active learning and how doing is more powerful than reading, which is pretty obvious. And it also said that saying or giving a talk is active learning, whereas just listening isn't as active. But if you're listening and watching a video, it is active. So watching and listening. So actually what I'm doing is I'm actively learning by speaking this stuff to myself. And I'm also creating a way for others to actively learn, whether it's myself or whoever, by having it on video instead of in books, whereas a lot of people put their knowledge and experience into a book, which is a passive way to learn. So really this is just one really long book. And a book might take 10 to 20 hours to read. So what I'll be creating will probably be like 5 or 10 books worth of stuff. And also there's a thing about transition of knowledge into skill. And I actually feel like map consciousness is this other domain of knowledge of the collective inner dimensions of humanity, and it's trying to translate that into skill by allowing us to tap into that. We're acting in different ways and being in different ways. It's trying to create the knowledge of the mind, of that invisible unknown realm, into the skill of humanity. Another thing with these videos is, by talking about this stuff, I'm sort of creating a skill of talking to myself, as opposed to just having supposed knowledge. I don't even know if I would call it knowledge,